Void Stranger is a Finnish Sokoban puzzler that can be characterized as a game as much as it can be an experience. It's got the ramping up of mechanics you'd expect of a computer game, but there's almost a differentiation that should be made between something like this and Mario Bros. This is a common sentiment a lot of indie games get, and I don't think it's because they go out of their way to be pretentious or deconstruct the medium. It's more likely these smaller studios aren't beholden to certain expectations like the big heads, meaning they have the freedom to push their games in a more unconventional direction. Void Stranger sacrifices guidance and quality of life features for the sake of propping up its aesthetic value. I'm led to believe that developers stood by their vision so strongly that any outside influence hardly mattered, and that's very respectable. I might be glazing a little, but it's deserved. This is one of the best games I've ever played. That being said, it's important to mention that most people aren't willing to take a lot of shit this game gives you. Whether Void Stranger's risks result in a great or terrible experience depends largely on your mentality towards games and the medium in general. I once advocated for the changing of the term video games to interactive video experiences, or IVEs for short. I proposed my idea to the great community at r/truegaming, and to all the wonderful minds on that subreddit, I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, go fuck yourselves. Seriously, you people berated me to no end, even though I didn't do anything fucking wrong. The game's pretty vague in its advertising. It's promoted as a Sokoban, but that's not entirely true. Pre-release material and trailers include zero demonstrations of the game's core mechanic, and the store page is equally lackluster. When they mention asking for help if you're stuck, I took that to mean it's the type of game that relies on crowdsourced knowledge to beat. That feeling was amplified when I was spoiled on what I didn't realize was an endgame puzzle very early, but I'm torn on whether working with others towards these overarching secrets is actually intended. If you're just starting the game, I think the extent to which you should be asking for help is for the solutions to individual flaws, and you'll have the best experience playing the game if done alongside others. Lots of people quit once these larger puzzles start coming to the forefront, not because they're bullshit, but mostly because they didn't anticipate the time investment they'd require. Point is, even if you know a secret exists, don't necessarily expect to solve it for a while. What you really shouldn't do is go to a public forum and ask why you're being forced to create a 6x6 brand before starting the game. One of the first things you'll see is a matrix, which clearly represents a code to input for your next playthrough. You're intended to play through this game blind, so this is a final warning before all the spoilers come to the forefront. Void Stranger's main mechanic is your rod. It lets you pick up any one floor tile and move it to an empty space on the same screen. The one limitation is you can't turn in place, meaning you can't move freely unless you have a 2x2 space to work with. This is elegantly conveyed to the player in the 4th floor, and the game generally has no hand-holding to speak of. The now accepted practice of introducing a threat to a player in a safe environment before prompting them to apply what they've learned is generally adhered to. Pushing objects, enemy movements, pushing objects to kill enemies, bumping walls to skip a turn, and making use of 3x1 bridges to move over gaps are all taught to the player very naturally. There's no rewind function to speak of, and you're discouraged from just dying to reset since the game has a live system. The lack of rewinding encourages confidence in your attempts, and in theory, should reduce the stress that comes with having access to infinite choices at every moment. I'd say this only becomes an issue in the post-game, which inhabits a disparate enough section of the game to not be worth keeping this up, even for aesthetics. Certain floors also have optional shards you can collect by removing the tile they're stuck in and making it to the staircase, which usually requires a little extra effort. These are used to unlock a set of memories, which you can piece together as you go. Each time you get to a tree, there's a prompt to take a break like I'm playing on my Wii. I thought this might happen, so I skipped the first tree, but it's actually necessary to rest here to see the plot. It does beg the question though, what's the point of closing the game, really? The more jaded might assume it's a way to leverage the Steam friend prompt for more advertising, but whenever I see someone launch a game multiple times in a row, I just assume it doesn't work or they're jerking off. After multiple trees, I figured this was an attempt to bridge the gameplay and narrative. The developers seem to intend for players to experience the themes of the game firsthand, and so to bridge sleeping with your controls, they decided the best course of action would be to shut off the game entirely. Launching the game again starts you directly within these dream sequences. It's revealed that your character's name is Gray, and these are her memories of the events that lead to the start of your playthrough. But what was stopping the game from, like, just going to the title screen? There's a couple reasons you might come up with, but I think the intention was for you to take a break just like Gray does. The early difficulty arises from the exhaustion of learning new mechanics in quick succession, and so I suppose there was an opportunity to tie together this facet of the gameplay with its story, while telling players to clear their minds for a bit. Alternatively, closing the game works as a pretty believable representation of time passing. I have to kneel and say there's a certain impact that comes with closing a game which can't be replicated by any other means. This feeling that you're exiting someplace or breaking a mainframe. Design decisions based around closing the game limit its potential for one-to-one ports to different platforms, which is a bit of a shame considering the screenshot and recording functionality that comes built in with every modern console would have paired really well here. This is a function that developers must have taken into consideration, and as with everything else in the game, it seems like the team at System Erasure, Ebrozy and Ebo, were unflinching in gatekeeping their vision above all else. Hey, mid-video ad roll. No, I'm just kidding. Bonus game, so the video doesn't get boring. Okay, so Gray here is wanted, and you gotta spot her before time runs out, and if you win... Okay, ready, go. So, did you find her? Let me know in the comments. Ironically, I felt the most motivation to continue after these trees, but that situation's a little hard to avoid. I found myself stopping soon after each one regardless. A boot to the title screen might not have been a clear enough signal to take a step back, but another aesthetic choice the game's made is to never load to that menu again until you meet certain criteria. Every preceding boot starts you at the beginning of whatever floor you left off at. This is done for story-related reasons, and the menu itself plays into that. What seemed to become more and more true as the game went on was that Void Stranger's gameplay exists in service of its aesthetics. This isn't to say the gameplay doesn't hold up on its own, because it absolutely does, but every mechanical choice such as a lack of rewinds, large-scale puzzles, the UI and live system serve to enrich the overall experience, and sometimes that means bucking the idea of what objectively good features are. There's this meme that a golden rulebook exists which video games, or really any medium, should abide by. A lot of people regard the changes we make over time to be an inherent sign of progress. For example, systems like limited lives and platformers are seen by many as archaic. Inventory limits are clunky. Maybe the ability to rewind is seen as an objective good in terms of streamlining, but in a lot of cases I have to disagree. The truth is, a game is more than the sum of its parts, and even the smallest aspects can change how you resonate with it both on a mechanical and emotional level. And no, just don't use it isn't an option, because the existence of these features alone subconsciously affects the way you approach things. When Pikmin 4 revealed that rewinding would be an in-game feature, so many normals on Twitter were like, I was too scared to try this franchise before, but now I'm so much more open to it. Motherfucker, you could always do that! It's just now contextualized, framed, and packaged differently. Instead of, you must get your 300-pound ass off the couch to reset your console, now it's... Yes, there is a slight difference in that you can be more precise with how much you rewind by, but I digress. There is an inherently different feeling between the two actions that the developers were aware of, and Void Stranger heavily toys with this aesthetic. It's kinda like if you're in a poly relationship but neither of you fucked anyone else. You would still feel different from if you were in a normal, healthy, monogamous relationship. Or kinda like saying, just stop watching porn, bro, and quit playing with your worm, like I'm just meant to ascend. This might come across as elitist, but I believe many people's core memories of games revolve around decisions like these, whether or not they're intentional. There's always small decisions which affect your perception of a game as a whole, and if this idea that there's an objectively correct trajectory to strive for was widely adopted, we'd end up with nothing but some homogenized slop that all looks and plays the same. Oh. Some floors contain locust idols which serve as your lives, and one's consumed each time you fall. There aren't many of these, and so I imagine most players will die pretty early in their playthrough. When I played, I died not too long after the second tree, floor 75 I believe. But what I found surprising was the number of people who died on the first fucking floor of the game. I don't know if this was intentional on the developer's part, but it seems like a bit of a problem. I just don't get how these people don't try to use the action button again after getting the rod. It's like the first thing you should think of. Not only that, but they resign themselves to death once the falling animation starts, like just press the button to go back. Video games are good at exploring what-if scenarios, and so part of the plot revolves around what would happen if you failed your goal. What would happen if you lost all your lives and died? But like without making a timeline for autistic people. If you expend all your locusts, this bat shows up and offers you another chance at life, given you eat this fruit. After playing video games my whole life and now looking like this guy, it was easy to deduce that eating this fruit would grant me infinite lives but lock me out of the good ending, while denying it would reset my game entirely. That was mostly true, and though some might be stubborn and choose to reset after every death, you'll eventually accept that going for the 1cc on your first try is a little unreasonable. This isn't a shmup though, it's a puzzle game. Once you know the solution to a floor, you're gonna be able to recite it with little trouble. Your mechanical prowess isn't really tested and improved since the game only moves when you do. In most other contexts, being made to play from the start like this makes little sense, but when you accept that these choices exist for the aesthetic, everything ends up clicking into place. Eating the fruit changes your status to voided, meaning you have infinite lives and won't consume locusts when you die. This also means you won't be seeing any more memory shards for the rest of the run, and so you get the benefit of tackling many floors slightly differently in later attempts, which helps to keep repeat puzzles engaging. At this point I managed to get enough shards for 2 of the memories. There's Lily drawing Kirby. After each tree, you'll find a new mural and new mechanics are introduced soon after. These come in the form of tiles, enemies, and statues which modify some aspects of gameplay, like the left statues which limit the amount of times you can use your rod. Pushing one off after it's lit transfers this count to another that's still on screen, but you'll learn that you can bypass this limitation either by pushing every statue off before using your rod, or eliminating them all at the same time. There's a gradual rise in complexity so as not to overwhelm newcomers while still challenging experienced players in the long run. The great part about these puzzles is that even up until the very end, they all have multiple solutions. I can only think of a single screen that requires a specific string of inputs. One of the greatest balancing acts that developers managed to pull off was including just the right amount of noise in every puzzle so that the solution isn't glaringly obvious. That's especially important when the game's visuals are so clean. The aforementioned perfectly executed stage has absolutely no noise to speak of, which is a perfect way of communicating that yeah, you're getting fucked here and the devs are perfectly aware. It's so good. So actually, 8 months after that Reddit post, Roblox implemented a change and replaced all mentions of the word game with experience. And obviously, I felt very validated that a company as big as Roblox had come around to my earlier suggestion. I returned to the True Gaming subreddit to, I guess, brag about how I was correct, and I don't know why, but people were a lot more angry this time. Besides the intro cutscene, talking to Tail here might be someone's first glimpse into a deeper layer to the story. Not only is there the chronological sequence of events that play out through Gray's dreams, there's also a mythos which extends from antiquity that blankets the entire experience. Now, I'm not really one for puzzle games. I can't name any I've played besides Pushmon like Honey Pop, so the idea of an overarching narrative was a huge draw for me. You could dedicate hours worth of discussion towards the lore, so I'll tread lightly, but I highly appreciate when games tell a story in ways that can't be done through other mediums. Typically this manifests through the gameplay, its difficulty, or scattered pieces of dialogue and exposition that can be obtained optionally or in a non-linear fashion. At this point, if you've played the game, your experience might differ depending on how perceptive you were. Me? I wasn't, and in some ways I guess I was the ideal player. Things progressed normally until I met Gore on basement 143, and for the first time the exit staircase was totally blocked. Waking them up and talking to them reveals quite a bit of information, but a missable piece of dialogue and huge chunk of gameplay is triggered if you use your rod in front of them. Gore mentions you're carrying the rod of the original Void Lord Ad, the person previously responsible for the Void and decapitating and castrating the traitors Gore and Use respectively. Ad has since left the Void for unknown reasons, but they've hidden treasures, including a blade which Gore requests you find to put them out of their misery. You're given a hint to find the blade, but given you've come this far without it, it's clear that both the player and Gray are just a little bit slow. The sequence isn't essential, but it does serve to further push you to uncover the first layer of the game's secrets. Since Gore's blocking the way, they tell you can leave the room if you drop into a pit directly in front of a smirking statue, provided you have sacrifices available in the form of locusts. This is one of the most disorienting parts of the game, but I think it works really great in retrospect. You'll notice you skip ahead by probably a couple floors, and if you're perceptive enough, you'll realize you moved down based on the amount of locusts you sacrificed. You're naturally given all the information for what appears to be a very risky but useful feature, while almost guaranteeing you'll complete your first run voided if you haven't died yet, since you'll probably end up in rooms with new mechanics that have progressed far beyond your understanding. Even still, I think it took me until about floor 200 through it to realize what kind of game I was really playing. Because this puzzle is solvable, but I think I was just too stupid because to me, it looked like there weren't possibly enough tiles to use, but guess what? You can actually step on the UI. And not only can you step on it, you can do this. And there's some downright heinous shit here. But at that point, I didn't really get it, and I was just thankful to have the extra tiles to move around with. While I wouldn't call this breaking the fourth wall, I would say the game does a great job at exploiting what you'd normally expect from one. So I guess this really isn't entry level. Getting to the end while voided exemplifies this, and it makes for one of the best fucking sequences I've ever experienced in a video game. Anyway, there's one last tree and it's got inverted colors. The envious one has poisoned your body, your mind, your devotion. Seek the dark idol to cleanse yourself, to return where you started. They really shoved this shit in your face. That's the first mural we saw, and we have no choice but to go down this staircase right underneath the dark idols we've been seeing all game. This returns you back to floor 1 with your void status purified. No title screen or anything. So when I said you had to use those murals on a new save file, I was actually lying. But that's legitimately what I thought when playing the game for the first time, and so I paid no mind to them besides taking a cool screenshot every time I passed by. There's actually really no necessity for your personal brand in these murals to both be carved in a 6x6 box, so I do believe that confusion was very much intended. Making your brand at the start carries slightly more significance, but I do believe its primary task was to obfuscate the purpose of the in-game murals. And what's so genius is that I started playing through the game a second time, and upon reaching floor 23, I immediately recognized the brand that I somehow totally missed on my first playthrough. Now, I don't know what state of mind I was in to not see this, but I think the inclusion of this shard here was a huge factor. You see, when you're getting acquainted with the game, you're just so delighted to get a moment of reprieve. Like, holy shit, a free floor. And that feeling is pronounced by the presence of a free shard there too. It's such a good incentive, especially because of the sound design, that your first instinct is to just rush that shit. This also means that had you gone void before reaching this floor, that shard wouldn't spawn, and from what I've seen, players that had gone void were much more likely to spot the solution hidden in plain sight. I can't imagine this was unintentional. If you're mechanically challenged or just plain bad at puzzle games, you're steered closer to this facet of the game earlier than other players, which should serve to add to your intrigue if the base game loop wasn't necessarily gripping. You should come to the conclusion that the staircase is the only tile that doesn't match the mural, and this entire sequence is just perfect. You need to purposely fall into the void to continue here, which you can figure out either through instinct, the fact that you removed the only other way of leaving the room, or based on the riddle you might have heard from Gore. You're dropped into an unknown basement with a chest that contains the void memory. With what appears to be no exit, your only option is to interact with this talking rock who tells you to pull some OCD shit, and it actually works. Now maybe I'm stupid, but it took me a while to realize the reason I could speak to a fucking rock is because I picked up the void memory. You can actually talk to every rock now. Not just rocks, but statues and creatures too. You can even decipher some text you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and with the new knowledge that you can warp back to floor 1 whenever you spot a Sif statue, you might just go back to see what you missed. Of course you would. At this point, you might be more interested in playing and wondering if it's still worth it. And my answer is, yeah. There's still the majority of the game to discover along with, the actual gameplay. There's still so much more to the game's aesthetic that I haven't touched on, like the matter of being forced to reset from floor 1. This feeling of, I guess, frustration of realizing you need to play the game all over again sort of bridges the gameplay and narrative, because not only will you start from the top again, but so will Gray. Maybe some people were surprised by this, but I wasn't, and maybe those who didn't expect this will get burned hard by that realization. Now, even the idea of backtracking can scare people, so at least one person probably pissed themselves from the thought of needing to replay the thing. I love when games allow you to connect with a character through its mechanics like this. Nier Automata did a similar thing in 2017. You're not really locked out of the good ending by being voided. Like, it's not a Toho. You aren't locked out of any ending at all, but you are taken through a narrative that lends more depth to the game's universe. And so what about the narrative? I'm not going to do a full story analysis, not only because that's a massive undertaking, but also because, just like the game takes inspiration from anime for its visuals, they were also inspired to make a story that shits the bed right at the finale. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, especially because there's a chance that developers will actually watch this. There's a lot to dig into here, but there's also so much left unsaid. Connections to their previous game Zero Ranger, the concept of multiple realities and timelines, and presumably set up for the next game to continue the same mythos that is just not something I'm particularly interested in evaluating. At this point I feel like I'm playing fucking Evangelion, but that's just me. Before I got to the end, I was enamored with piecing together all the lore and connections between characters, and the game still stands out in my mind as a paragon of storytelling. So although I won't delve into the mythos and symbolism, it's worth exploring the A-plot, which is mostly delivered through dream sequences. And I don't mean to sound like an eye patch wolf, but no messing around when it comes to the story because Void Stranger really struck a chord with me. I'd like to cover the story with some respect, not only because of the intensity of the subjects it touches on, but like I've said, it feels like the majority of the game exists to deliver these messages, which is a bit ironic because the developers have explicitly talked about how it was meant to be the total opposite. Once the post-game puzzles were being developed, one of the devs' wives mentioned that there was no way she was playing through any more of these stages unless there was a narrative to carry her through it. Given what you discover while playing, I have to imagine the game's vision shifted from a purely mechanical experience to a more aesthetic one partway through. So let me put the narrative to the side for a bit and explain why I feel this way. There's a bunch more murals we have the opportunity to solve, and although you might think you're prepped since you deciphered the first one, think again because the rest of the murals aren't nearly as simple. The second one you find is fucked up, and the actual brand isn't pre-carved by the time you arrive. You should have the capacity to solve the third mural in B's domain, which grants you the wings, and the fifth mural in Tan's domain to earn the blade. The wings give you the ability to fly over a single empty space and recharge once you step on land again. The blade allows you to kill off any one enemy in front of you, but in a perfect twist, the game won't let you out without a boss fight. This section comes out of nowhere and it's just amazing. You really feel pressured to act fast, largely due in part to the music, even though every fight in the game still takes place within the same constraints as regular gameplay. You're still locked to a grid, enemies still only move when you do, and you're still able to, and required to use your rod. Swinging your blade is a context-sensitive action that replaces your rod whenever you're in front of an enemy, and using it counts as a turn just the same. Your options are permanently expanded on without adding any extra input since all three of your burdens, what the game calls your items, never overlap in circumstance. It's a really elegant solution which totally alters your kit without any needless complexity. The wings and blade are essential mechanics that turn the game on its head. The fact that the developers took the time to meticulously craft over 500 puzzles only to intentionally ask you to break them is something you'd never find in a AAA game. But it also makes you question why. These two items trivialize nearly every puzzle thus far, and seeing as the original vision for the game and its story was to end at Basement 255, having these game-breaking mechanics and the method to get into them doesn't really serve a higher, more meaningful purpose unless the game's scope were to be expanded dramatically. Because although it is cool to breeze through the puzzles, it doesn't mean shit in that context alone. Unbeknownst to you, these items actually serve as the key to breaking out of the game's preconceived narrative, though that likely won't be evident to a player until they accrue more knowledge. They'll typically only serve to allow entrance to a couple of optional areas at this point that result in no mechanically tangible reward. If you come back for gore with your blade, you'll be greeted by B and this rock, who tell you you'll probably never find them again. This unlocks a Stinky Hole, which contains the first set of puzzles that require a blade to solve, though its use is very minimal. This section gets more mileage out of punishing you for being trigger happy, which is interesting in its own way. It's similar in concept to the Tan statues, which vanish once every enemy on screen is killed. Half the puzzles require erasing the statues, while others need you to keep them around, flipping the puzzle to figuring out how you can keep at least one enemy alive while making it to the exit. This area comes across like a ROM hack, both aesthetically and mechanically. Instead of stairs, you need to logically deduce which tile to fall through on each floor, which is a pretty fun change of pace. This ends in a boss fight with some of the best music in the game and some lore implications about Gore's real body. The other optional area is Mon's Funhouse, which is gated behind access to both the blade and wings. Both these areas introduce new mechanics, but the difficulty spike in Mon's Funhouse was a little overwhelming, and on the game's launch, if you were voided, there was no way to reset your run save for deleting your data through the file explorer. So if you're a zoomer, there was no hope for you. It took me like 2 days to get through here while listening to this track on repeat. And I mean, the music's good. Like, it's really good, but what the fuck is with Ebrosi's obsession with the falling metal pipe sound effect? Like, why is that in there? I mean, it's not bad, but to me it's like the Wilhelm scream but for zoomers, which somehow makes it worse. Like, I know I'm a sourpuss, but I don't know. I guess you can't really grasp the context of foreign memes. Like, I love when the anime girl gets embarrassed and, you know, she's all like embarrassed and hits the guy and that. I'm not very musically inclined, so what I will say is that Void Stranger has quite possibly the best OST of any game I've ever played. It was a pleasant surprise to have this intense music in a puzzle game, and a lot of effort was put into meaningfully connecting scenes by way of shared leitmotifs and instruments. So yeah, this also means the pipe is there in every track relevant to Mon. This area makes intense use of your wings, more so than the blade. It also forced me to be conscious of the game's order of operations. Before this, it was clear. The game registers your movements first, then follows up with the enemies. This is why you can do things like take a staircase when you would otherwise die. You learn that statues are calculated after your actions but before the enemies, meaning these new Mon statues that kill you when standing in their cardinal line of sight require an entity to block their vision both before and after you step in front of them so that you can survive. It's not badly implemented, it just takes a moment to digest. Both these areas result in little more than lore details that should nudge you in the right direction by the time you reach the endgame. You could say extra gameplay should be its own reward, but the fact that coming to Mon's Funhouse this early only means you need to go through it again at a later time makes me think otherwise. It seems like these areas were designed largely for an exploration of the game's narrative and meant to promote that oh shit moment when you connect the dots. Like damn, this place was here all along. B's hole is trivial if not to elaborate on the narrative consequences of your blade and the death of these Void Lords. If the game solely focused on its Sokoban puzzles, they could have simply thrust the burdens on you as you progressed through the game and linearly introduced floors that required them. In fact, the extra post-launch stages do exactly that, though even those include some more world building and add to the narrative. Okay, so Gray is the lady-in-waiting to the young Princess Lily, a girl who lost her mother at a young age and is vehemently denying any and all marriage candidates, until she meets Johan, a groom with certified wizard powers, and they quickly announce their engagement. Gray turns apprehensive of the marriage for many reasons, mainly that Johan has made it clear to Gray that he sees the princess as nothing more than a political tool, but the conversation results in Gray being knocked out cold by him, waking up an indeterminate amount of time later to find Lily about to take her own life. Before there's any chance for explanation, Johan makes a move to arrest Gray and sentences her to death. Soon afterwards, that guy with the glasses comes out to release Gray, only for her to find out that Johan's wiped out every soul at the ceremony with one person left to go. He gives us the quick rundown on his origin story, where he lies nearly dead on the battlefield before looking up to see what appear to be 3 demons, promising him endless power in exchange for his unwavering devotion. Void Lords B and Sif show up, explain that Johan is 1 soul away from his quota, and just before Gray dies fighting, Lily interrupts and offers up her soul in exchange for Gray's protection. Gray kills Johan and goes on to search for Lily at the end of the world, at the bottom of the void. And here we are, at long last. There's quite a lot that happens here. Put 2 and 2 together, and the reason Lily was trying to kill herself earlier is because she got sexually assaulted. Gray can choose to save one soul and one soul only, under the condition that she can never return to the void. While the relationship between Gray and Lily is maternal on the surface, there's clear implications and themes of romantic attraction between the two. It's really just a devastating scenario for everyone involved, and emotions can run high. The way the news is delivered to Gray and the intentionally difficult choice that's imposed on what is a massively flawed character only upholds the tragedy of the situation. The credits roll and Gray wakes up outside in a modern-day city with a fetus clasped in her hands. To say I was bummed out by this ending is an understatement, and although this exact scenario can't be found in reality, I'm sure lots of people can make an abstraction and relate to it in a variety of ways. The despair over not being able to protect a loved one, the guilt, shame, and embarrassment that comes with it, the pain of conflicting emotions, and the hurt of not being able to see them ever again is very palpable. Gray's perspective is marred by emotions that selfishly detract from the victim, and we eventually get to see the results of these bottled up emotions through the remainder of her life. When you hold everything in, then at some point something has to give, and that explosion always ends badly. Point is, she raises the new kid, names it Lily with an IE, and is haunted for the rest of her life by the dichotomy of either living peacefully or endangering Lily and her relationship with her by training her for the slim chance she can save her biological mother when she grows up. The decision to save the fetus and not Princess Lily is off-screen, and so a lot is left up to interpretation, but I will say that this is not a pro-life message. With further context, it becomes clear that Gray makes the decision on the basis of what are ultimately unrelated, but still selfish reasons. This is a much more essential plot point that a player will deduce once the story comes to a head, but what it means right now is that Gray is operating under the whims of a person who has no womb and the desire to have a perfect human child. It's selfish how Gray felt, how she acted, and the decisions she made, but she makes that decision and chooses to live the rest of her life miserable and guilty over it. A couple of decades later and Gray is dead. She never gets to see Princess Lily again. This is about the point where the core gameplay can take a back seat and your intimate knowledge of navigating the void becomes the focal point of the game. Here's something you'll likely have figured out by now. If you navigate back to the title screen by refusing the fruit, you actually do get to input cheat code brands that alter the state you begin the game in, like unlocking all the burdens and starting as Lily. This is very important because if you play as Lily directly after Gray, the game takes into account all the decisions you made. If you picked up any of the burdens as Gray, you won't be finding them as Lily, and a lot of these remix stages are hard, even with all the burdens unlocked. The game gives you a variety of ways to manipulate your level in the void, be it through Mon's shortcuts, crafting brands, the bee statues, or editing the UI to your advantage. Some people describe this as a knowledge game. You can literally get to floor 255 in under 10 minutes once you know what you're doing, and these burdens and murals lie at the center of that power. The actual mechanics of the game and its Sokoban puzzles are now a means to its aesthetics. This idea is only strengthened by the fact that void status ends up having no effect on Lily's playthrough for plot-related reasons. This is the point where I question the game's design decisions, and I do just mean question because I personally loved it. But what the hell were the developers thinking? Surely they knew this difficulty spike would make people quit, especially after they pull this shit. Sometimes they even goad you into pushing one of the statues directly above the staircase of your own volition. I'd be hard-pressed not to call this Kino, but the game's practically taunting you into figuring out how you can skip all this. The game really pushes you out of your comfort zone here, and it might seem like it's asking for way too much, but Void Stranger always gives you the tools to overcome the obstacles in your path, whether it be through teaching you the Sokoban mechanics or getting you acquainted with its world. What's on screen now serves the game beyond just a Sokoban puzzle. Gray's playthrough teaches you to be observant and look at the game from a higher perspective, and the game's happy to punish you if you don't follow that lesson. Knowing the stage layouts were remixed, my only goal was to digest the story by making it to every tree as efficiently as possible. Even though development changed to expand the narrative after Gray's stages were complete, it still must have been a relatively early decision because the whole game is built around the lore and mastery of the Void. No, we're skipping this one. In what I can only describe as Ludo, you'll piece together that the memories you've been unlocking with your shards are actually diegetic photographs of modern-day Lily, spanning her early childhood all the way up to her conscription in the military. If it wasn't clear, by the time Gray emerges from the Void, 10,000 years have passed and the two live their life in modern-day Finland. Honestly, coming out of the Void many years later is not particularly relevant except to make Gray suffer more in a world she's unfamiliar with. It's hard to really capitalize on that plot point when all the gameplay takes place within the Void where the mechanics don't change at all, though it does add more mystique to the setting, like getting to see firsthand how time doesn't flow linearly here. What is weird is that every NPC you encounter in the Void can understand you perfectly. You stumble across strangers from Gray's era all the way up until the modern day, and I wouldn't even be nitpicking this detail if not for the fact that the game establishes that the written script from Gray's time is all but forgotten. It's even implied that Gray was speaking an incomprehensible language when she first left the Void, but when Princess Lily comes out, she can suddenly speak Finnish just fine. Oops. Yeah, that's how the story ends. Interestingly enough, the dreams you see as Lily are memories from Gray's perspective which follow her slow downfall. It starts with Gray drilling the history of the Void into Lily as a child, training her to be proficient in hand-to-hand combat, and even going on frivolous dates which just set her feelings of shame and regret into overdrive. When Lily doesn't live her life according to Gray, she lashes out, culminating in a scene where Gray slaps Lily, reveals to her that she isn't actually her daughter, and kicks her out of the house. Everything in Gray's life eventually devolved to finding a way to save Princess Lily from the Void, at the expense of what should have been her daughter's happiness. Sometime after Lily cuts ties with Gray and joins the military, she receives a call from Freya, Gray's friend who found her when she first exited the Void, who lets her know that Gray has passed away. Lily has a conversation with Freya, asking her about Gray and her true parents, and the memory of these scenes caused the weight of everything to come crashing down on her and... Fuck, I'm really just summarizing the plot here. The remainder of the Justice Court say that as long as Lily leaves in peace, Dis is willing to make a contract with her. To the answer of what her heart desires, Lily says, It's not stated outright, but Lily has a profound experience which presumably also gave her a direct connection to Gray's memories. The absolute and pure forgiveness Lily offers Gray finally frees them both from the burdens they've been carrying their entire lives. Even though Gray used Lily to selfishly satisfy her own whims and ambitions, she's still able to forgive. Wow, what a great story. It made me want to cry. The setting and its events aren't based in reality, but interactions between deeply tragic people and the pure attempts at trying to understand one another and accommodate each other's flaws and emotions despite our misgivings are very real experiences people can relate to that define what it means to be human. It's a reminder to cherish people before they're gone, or before you push them away. Forgiveness is a central theme that'll continue to worm its way through the remainder of Void Stranger's plot. Jesus. Sif's Run is a new game plus in the way you'd expect it to function in a JRPG. You start with all burdens unlocked and the room layouts nosedive in difficulty back to Gray's version of the tower. The purpose of Sif's playthrough is not only to make you aware of the burdens if you somehow made it this far without discovering them, but also for you to absorb a different, more studied perspective of the game's lore that fills in some missing details. For example, you learn that these trees are actually called Lotus Eater machines. Now what bearing does that have on the story? In this sense, the gameplay temporarily becomes a backdrop for the narrative, making itself clear that it extends far beyond just Gray and Lily. If you choose to optionally make it to the bottom of the void, you'll find the one active Lotus Eater machine in Sif's playthrough. It contains Ad's memory of bringing Sif to life, marking them as the closest they'll ever come to creating a perfect being, as close to a human as possible. This last tree comes after Sif's domain, and it's great how the music there is made up of bits of instruments and melodies from every other area. It represents that Sif is born, fails, and succeeds off the trail of the other Void Lords. Void Stranger is ultimately about connections. It's a story about the Void Lords and the civil war between them that leads to the tragedies each character experiences. B's gone missing and you learn from Tail that Mon, the little hint peddler we see as the other characters, is actually alive, to the surprise of Sif and the others. This leads us back to Mon's funhouse, except the end of the area isn't blocked off like it would be in Gray and Lily's playthroughs. Sif corners Mon lets it slip that they're working with someone else, and there's a really annoying boss fight before we reunite with B. Roll credits. Well, wait a minute, this boss actually blows. It's a deterministic fight where your inputs directly influence Mon's next action. The head will chase you around and your goal is to damage the tip of their tail. You can only do this from the sides, since the tail functions like the Mon statues which kill you if you step into their line of sight. When you find a route that gets you some decent progress, you'll start a cycle of executing the same inputs perfectly without fail just to get the chance to experiment with a different set of actions at the end. It feels more like a test of memory than a fight, and though it's similar in execution to the regular Sokoban puzzles, one wrong move in those doesn't always lead to death. To win this fight, you have to hit Mon 4 times, and by the time you manage to win, you don't even feel satisfied. It didn't feel like it took any real skill and intelligence to beat. None of this is objectively bad though, and some people love this fight so much for these exact reasons. But those same people also talk about how they loved routing the fight and experimenting to find the fastest kill. Seems to me they have the same genotype as speedrunners, meaning I can't in good conscience respect that opinion. That's the end of Void Stranger's first timeline. Sif's playthrough works as an important supplement to the narrative that offers up more questions about the nature of the Void, particularly the empty brand on 225 which Sif relates to Dis. The remainder of the game's events are unlocked by solving every mural, though only the human characters, Gray and Lily, are able to do this. This means we need to turn back time to when Gray was still in the Void and do things differently. It's entirely possible to access this second, true ending on your first playthrough, though you'll likely not have the knowledge nor trained yourself to think the way the game wants you to at that point. I mean, this is really fucked up. This rock, well, it's actually an egg here, says, "The tail of the traitorous lord connects the brand." So what are you meant to do? Obviously, you need to take a screenshot of every room with tails in it and figure out how they connect. Now how in the fuck? Alright, that's a pretty reasonable ask. I was spoiled on this pretty early on, so I can't tell you if I would have figured it out alone, but these are the sort of puzzles that require a nudge in the right direction. The first mention I saw of the solution was, the System Erasure Discord discovered this, so I did some digging and of course it was a furry who solved it. It's easy enough to figure out you need to stitch the images together, but putting that into practice is a lot more difficult. Take a look at how long it took me to solve it myself. I couldn't figure it out. Granted, it's been 7 months since I originally played the game, but I've seen the solution before and still had a difficult time recreating it. This is how the final stitch should look, and like I wasn't that far off, but connecting this bottom part just seems brutal. And this is after the puzzle was patched to make it easier. You can kind of get a sense for how the shape should be arranged by comparing it to the broken mural, but that requires you to intuit that the snake actually forms the inverse of the pattern, and I suppose you might have been able to figure that out had you realized that the inverse of every mural actually represents a Sanskrit numeral, but fuck. I had a lot of help in solving the murals. The game doesn't try to steer you wrong, but a lot of these puzzles rely on noticing small details that, if missed, totally lock you out of progressing at all. This is part of the bullshit I was referring to, and though I think every solution is cool in retrospect, I'm really not sure how much of the game I'd have played if I wasn't discovering things alongside others. To get Gore's full mural, you need to inspect both the left and right side of the wall, and of anything, this might actually be the worst puzzle in the game. Their chamber teaches you about manipulating the UI, specifically your floor, by swapping the last 2 digits around with your locus count. This egg also lets you know that the B there actually stands for brain, not basement. Now what does that add to the game? Sif's mural is only accessible through this trick. You need to keep an eye on the floor count and notice he normally skipped from brain 222 straight to 224. All the knowledge you gain from the brand rooms tells you this. You need to warp to floor 0 to find an altar of the 3 traitorous lords, Mon, Yus, and Gore. Mon's hiding their presence from Dis and is already considered dead, but you need to slay the other 2 lords to destroy the altar. Killing Gore is simple enough since they want to die anyway, but Yus's tail is blocked by an ad statue, which you learn requires hitting it 23 times and waiting for it to disappear, which is just ridiculous enough to roll back into being pretty cool. Ad's upgraded scepter is as much of, if not more of a game changer than the wings and blade. It lets you carry an unlimited number of tiles each floor and operates as a stack, using a last in first out method of determining which tile you place next. This means you're finally able to carve the empty brand of Dis on floor 225. I'm a huge fan of how they prevented you from drawing this brand on any other floor, due to them always having at least one tile that's immovable. Dis isn't necessarily this final gauntlet of your knowledge, because it still introduces new mechanics and expands on the use of your burdens. And really, this is only the second time the game mandates use of your wings and blade to solve Sokoban puzzles. UI manipulation becomes an integral part of these floors. At multiple points, the game leaves you no choice but to purposefully take away use of your burdens to proceed. You're taught in the second room that holding your burdens means they're unusable, and this mechanic is typically paired with very few left statues. These puzzles are also the first to make use of your upgraded scepter. Your current stack is never visualized by the UI, except for the next tile you'll spit out like it always has. This may be seen as a design flaw, but it seems clear to me that the game's pushing you to start mentally tracking your stack. I'm sure a solution could have been implemented to show maybe the top 3 tiles and total number of them you're carrying at all times, but the exact sequence of tiles you place and carry becomes the focal point of a few puzzles. This area introduces statues of the remaining 2 traitors to great effect. Yus creates a new tile when pushed off a ledge, while Gore can only be pushed a single time before they're immovable. The blast tiles also get to shine when paired with wings, granting them some added depth. it should become clear over time that ad statues are unique, and that every instance they're found, a different meta puzzle given to you by an egg needs to be solved to get them to disappear. Could be hitting a chest 6 times, killing enemies in a predefined order, or breaking every glass tile on screen. So I'm sure you can understand the anger from people when the solution to this puzzle was to pause the fucking game 3 times in a row. The presence of the statue tips you off to the fact that you'll need to perform some nonsense, but there's too much noise here and it gets you to think you can actually accomplish something by interfacing with the game's mechanics. The issue is that the solution to this puzzle doesn't require the ad statue to disappear, but to move up a couple tiles. The left side of the screen should have been totally inaccessible because the game strings you along to think there's a way to get there and push it yourself. This floor was patched a few weeks after launch to make the egg explicitly tell you to pause your game, so the only puzzle left here is thinking to talk to them more than once. Honestly, I think they should have left the room as is rather than kneeling to the masses, because it wasn't that much more obtuse than some other things in the game, and now it's just a little gay. Oh fucking course. Oh yeah, here's the floor that needs a specific string of inputs. It's fucking awesome. I love how the final Sokoban style puzzles to push the statues of all the Void Lords off in the order of their incarnation. It's the perfect way to blend the gameplay and narrative and really test how much you've been paying attention to the structure of the game as a whole. Near the bottom of this is a great rematch with B. Narratively, this is a continuation of the scripted RPG fights in Gray's Dream, but mechanically, it feels like an upgraded version of the floor baby in B's hole. That fight spawned lightning tiles which scrolled across the screen and killed you if you stepped on them. B's fight replaces those tiles with tiny flies. They'll still kill you on contact, but you can weave in and out to cut them up, which chips away at B's health. The boss fights in the game push the Sokoban mechanics to its limit, and I would have thought they'd exhausted everything they could do with the combat until the Sif fight. Oh, this is the coolest fight in the game and it takes place in real time. If you're clever, you'll figure out the solution to instantly beat Sif based on what you've learned about them in their playthrough, but there is a way to beat them like you would in an action game. You need to collect dozens of tiles to crush Sif with, and there's a surprising amount of depth here. There's 3 phases to this fight, the second of which you can skip if you manage to overflow damage while Sif's stuck in an attack animation. Hitboxes also operate like a shmup, where your character and bullets have more leniency than their sprites may lead you to believe. The third phase is beautiful and the goal is to endure Sif's oncoming attacks until they finally give out. So I tried for 7 hours and I just had to give up. Like, I'd get to the third phase, but my heart rate would skyrocket and I'd just choke over and over again. And then I saw this guy mod the game to remove both his wings and upgraded scepter and beat it like it was nothing, so I thought, yeah, you know what, I'm just not built for this. The final attacks you need to dodge are these waves that pulsate in a rhythm. They slow down over time while the color fades away from the screen, and you need to do one last dodge blind once the screen goes totally dark. It's so cool and very reminiscent of Drakengard. This fight is seriously intense, and you know, props to anyone who could beat it, but I just had to move on. I love the anime-inspired cutscene for Lev here. Even if you've figured out that they were the showrunner prior to this scene, it's so well done that it just gets you pumped anyway. There's lots of hints littered around that clue you into the fact that they were the bat all along, but also this is kind of where I stopped caring for the plot. Turns out Gray is the reincarnation of Ad, and Lily is the reincarnation of, like, Erasure from Zero Ranger or something like that, and there's time travel and parallel universes, and it's just not for me. There aren't even any concrete answers to what's happening, so I'm not going to bother speculating, but the narrative thread that leads us here is Lev's resentment towards Ad for seemingly neglecting them. Unlike other games that shift to a half-baked genre at the end, System Erasure are experienced shmup devs and actually implemented a fully fledged side mode to take advantage of the mechanical depth they included here. There's even a different shot type depending on whether you play as Gray or Lily, and so what happens is that you're finally able to touch Lev's heart to get through to them, and it ends with both Ad and Lev forgiving each other. And really this part made me want to cry. I did cry. Well, would you look at that? That's the fucking guy that beat Sif in that one video. So not only was he a cheater, he was a beta tester too.
He's a beta tester and a cheater. He's a beater. You can call me a beater. Just make sure.
What? And that's the game. At least the end of the main narrative. It feels like even for the true end, answers don't get tied up neatly enough to leave me feeling totally satisfied, but that's the type of story System Erasure wanted to tell. I'm not of the opinion that this should inarguably be considered the canon ending, and it's a bit sad that people might write off the other timeline due to this one feeling more conclusive in a gameplay sense. This is a great finale that doesn't overstay its welcome, but it feels like the upgraded scepter doesn't get as much use as it probably could have. It must be really hard to design puzzles with so much freedom though. There's a reason they restrict you with Lev statues there so often. Other underutilized elements get more time to shine in the post-game puzzles, which are legitimately inaccessible without community interaction, and that's the biggest reason I question whether or not the main game should be solved alone. Man, I really love the characters in this game. I grew so attached to all of them, which I feel is a product of the gameplay more so than the story. I actually can't think of a more likable main cast besides maybe the original FF7, and I don't have a problem with the fact that Gray is Ad or whatever because there was a lot of foreshadowing leading up to that reveal, like how every Lotus Eater machine seems to exclusively carry Gray and Ad's memories. Something I haven't seen discussed is the weird distinction between how Gray interacts with other characters during gameplay versus how Lily and Sif's playthroughs handle it. The latter are always outspoken with their portraits, while Gray opts for a second-person monologue style. This might just be an oversight, but I like to think it means that Gray is interacting with NPCs in the Void telepathically like the rest of the Void Lords can do with Lev, but there's also a lot of holes in that idea. You can never experience the game like you did the first time, which is a little sad, but that's the beauty of it. If you want some replay value, there's a score attack mode built into the game, and thank God for that. Fuck speedrunning, and fuck doing things quickly. Do it efficiently and with purpose.